could go back to the negotiating table in Islamabad this week. That's according to Reuters. Meanwhile, on the first day of the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports in the Persian Gulf, a handful of ships did manage to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Oil is at $98 a barrel. Tomorrow is a big day for procrastinators. It is tax day. And while some of us may have waited till the last minute to do our taxes, the federal government sure won't be wasting any time spending them. Marketplace's Samantha Fields has more on where your money is going.
In Dorothy Brown's experience, most people prefer not to even think about taxes.
April 15th comes around and I'm like, ugh.
Brown teaches at Georgetown University Law School.
It's like I'm at a reception and somebody says, what do you do? And I go, I'm a tax law professor. And, sometimes I could clear the room.
Doing your taxes isn't exactly popular either. When your W-2 comes and you see in black and white how much of your hard-earned salary went straight to the government, it doesn't always feel great, especially if you're struggling with your bills. But Brown says your money does pay for critical things.
It pays for Social Security. It pays for food stamps. It pays for school lunches. It pays for science and medical research.
That's why Elaine Mogg at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center feels differently than most.
I'm excited to pay taxes.
Really? She finds it exciting because of where her money's going, like the nearly 23% that goes to Social Security.
These are benefits we promise to people. They've typically paid for many, many years working, and they expect them in retirement.
Another 24% or so goes to health care.
This is mostly Medicare, which again, this is a promise we've made to people as they age. We're going to put them into, public health care.
It's also Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program for low-income families, along with what's left of those Affordable Care Act subsidies.
And then about 13% goes on what's called non-defense discretionary spending, things like housing, transportation, education, and the environment.
Another 13% or so is divvied up among safety net programs like food assistance, veterans and unemployment benefits, and child nutrition programs.
The next category is we spend 14% just on interest on the debt. It's the fastest growing category.
And the last roughly 13% pays for defense, or Mogg says it did before the war.
These numbers are all before we went into Iran. And so that number is going to be a lot bigger at the end of the year.
How much bigger, no one knows yet. Erica York at the Tax Foundation says the other thing most people don't think about and might be surprised by is how much our taxes don't cover.
People might feel like they're taxed a lot right now, but when you compare all of the tax revenues that the federal government generates, it falls short of how much the federal government spends.
In the last fiscal year, our taxes covered less than 75% of total spending. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
The Producer Price Index, that measures inflation from the wholesaler's perspective, that is up 4% year over year in March. That is the highest rate of increase since 2023. All right, let's do the numbers. Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are all up in the 1 to 0.5% range, with Dow futures up just 31 points. Amazon has been getting into the satellite business, and this morning it signed a deal to acquire satellite operator Globalstar for $11.6 billion. Amazon shares are up 1.5% in pre-market trading. Globalstar stock is up 11%.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Yubico, makers of the YubiKey. Designed to stop hackers and phishing attempts, it protects the apps and accounts people rely on every day. YubiKey, powerful protection, instant access. Learn more at yubico.com. And by Schwab. At Schwab, investors get choices ranging from self-directed investing to full-service wealth management all in one place. Learn more at schwab.com.
Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell said at his latest press conference that the labor market hasn't been doing much recently. No net job creation over the last 6 months. That is a precarious place to be. Marketplace's Justin Ho reports.
The labor market's in equilibrium for a couple of reasons. Nicole Servey, an economist with Wells Fargo, says on one side there's demand for labor, which has been slowing.
You have employers that have just really had a rough year in terms of uncertainty. You have changes in trade policy. Now we have the conflict in the Middle East.
And on the other side, there's labor supply. Servey says that's slowing down too, thanks in large part to the Trump administration's crackdown on immigration.
And what we've seen with the changes in immigration policies, net immigration to the United States was likely zero, if not negative, in 2025. And that's really weighing on the extent to which the labor market can grow.
In other words, the supply of labor is weakening at a time when there's also less demand for it. So at the end of the day,
you have both lower employment and lower population. And, those two will largely cancel each other out.
That's Preston Moy, senior economist at Employ America. He says that's why the unemployment rate has been holding steady for several months, despite the fact that jobs growth has been weak. Because if there's also fewer people in the labor market,
you might see payroll numbers falling or even, hit zero or perhaps even negative. And it could be totally fine when you're thinking about, what percentage of the population is employed.
That is a sign that the labor market is stable right now, says Courtney Schubert, an economist with Macro Policy Perspectives.
We know that there's not, a huge increase in the number of people being laid off right now. And that's good, right? That's healthy, that we're not seeing unemployment spike.
But Schubert says this equilibrium that we're in can also shut people out of the labor market. For instance, she says there are plenty of younger workers who are struggling to enter the workforce right now. Another concern is that if employers aren't adding new jobs over the long term, economic growth can slow down.
If fewer people are joining the labor market every month, or people aren't able to change jobs as frequently as they'd like, or demand the wage gains that they might have been able to get in, say, 2022, that limits the consumption potential.
Schubert says that can also make the economy more vulnerable, especially if something else affects consumption, including a spike in energy prices.
As we have an energy shock, households may be slightly more constrained just because they're facing a slightly different labor market than they were a few years ago.
Schubert says this doesn't mean the economy is headed toward a recession, but it does mean that the economy is less resilient. I'm Justin Howe for Marketplace.
And in New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.